In this video, we're going to be doing another example that is based on your periodic functions. So in this one, we have a table rather than a graph. So your lecture will always ask you in this format or the graph method. So it's important that you understand both of these ones. So the question says the function of y is equals to f of x is a periodic function. Some functions values are represented in the table below. Find the period of the function and the value of your negative 585. So remember, with your table, what are you given? Your table is like this, and this always represents your x values, and this would be your y values. And in order to make sure that you understand the two examples, I will try to use a graph also to explain them together. And also, if you haven't watched the first example that I did on a graph, I would suggest that you also go and check it out. I'll also leave the link to that video in the comments. So we have something that looks like this. The first thing that we have to do is to calculate the period. So if we're calculating the period, what are we going to check? We are going to check those x values that gives us the same outcome of y values. So where do we get those? If you can check where your x is equals to 5, you have your 1.8. And also, if you can check where your x is 25, you also have your 1.8. So this means now you can say your period is what? Your period is 25 minus 5, which is going to be 20. You see? So just to explain this in a more graphical method, so let's just say we still have a graph that looks like this. Then yeah, similar to the one that we had in that last example. Then we have the first circle goes down, and we have the second circle and it goes down. Here we had 4, then in the middle we had 3, then in the middle here we will have that 7, then here we will have that 8. You see? So what basically happens is that I'm saying here, when I have my f of 0, I have 2. So this is where the graph starts, then it goes up, it moves a full circle, then it returns here. Then when I have f of 4, I also have 2. Then when I have f of 8, I also have a y value of 2. So it's basically more or less the same concept, but it's more different when it comes to a table. So here I'm just trying to at least write it for you so that you understand what is it that they're trying to calculate. So normally on this one, you would see that you guys would use a formula that looks like this. They would tell you that you have your f of x is equals to your f into your x plus your k, your k multiplied by your p. So yeah, we also have to explain this one. So the p that you have here, it's your period. It's your period. Then the k that you have here, your k can either be positive or negative. So your k is simply any integer. So the k tells you how many full periods you shift along the x-axis. So in simple, it also tells you how many times is this graph going to jump or make those circle. So how do we find our k? We find our k by dividing our value that we're going to be given, our f of x, which is going to be to be this. Then if we divide this value by the period, then we will know how many times does our graph jump. You see, so yeah, our k just simply tells us how many times does our graph jump. And another thing that I wanted to explain, okay, let me just finish with this one. Your f of your x value, this would basically be this one that you have to work out. Then also coming back to this one, our key values, how do we know when to use a negative or when to use a positive? Because we can have a formula like this, but here you can either have a negative or you can either have a positive. So if you are having a negative number here you are going to add a positive. If you are having a positive number here you are going to write a negative. So why are we doing that? So we're going to start with a negative number. If we are looking at our table, we have x values and y values that are positive. Or I would also use this example here that we are only having a graph that is on the positive side, but now they're asking you of values that are on the negative side. So I'll just do a quick example here just to to show you how you can do this one. So let's just say in this graph they tell you to find your f of -1, but you notice that your minus is going to be somewhere along here, which is not given to you. You're only given that portion. So in that video I said if you are given numbers that are near to the graph or they are not far to the graph, what do I mean? Here you have your graph that ended on 8. You can have what's your thing, they ask you something like your f of 11 and so on. These are numbers that are near, so you can just subtract the period here, then work backward. So you'll just say you have f of your 11 minus your 4, which is that period. Then you're going to get your f of 7. F of 7 you can read from the graph. You'll just go and say okay, then you check that value here. I think here, yeah, you can even write 12. Then you'll just say this would be equals to 12. You see, so since this it's a negative number, it means now you're going to say you have f of your -1 plus your 4. You're adding that. But now we're having this similar example but in a table format. They want to know the x values on this side, on the left hand side, that are negative. We now have -585. You see, in order to work to this table or to the side that is positive, we have to add the period. We're going to add the period, which is going to be that 20. So I just hope you now understand in which case do we have to add and in which case do we have to subtract. So you now see that if I have a negative and I can only be able to see positive values, it means I must add here in order to work to the positive side. So yeah, let's continue. Let's continue. So what more do you need to work out? I said, okay, we've worked out our period. After working our period, we can say what would be our k. Our k, that's going to be what? It's going to be 585 divided by 20. This is going to give us 29.25. So let me just erase this because yeah, we're done with the explanations. I just hope you were able to understand the logic between the two. So we're getting 29.25. So when you are doing your division for this one, don't pay much attention to the negative or the positive. So you'll only pay attention when you come back and do it again this side. So just to repeat, when you are working out your K value, if you are given minus like this or it's even if it's a positive, you always work it out as if it's a positive number, then find it out. You'll only do your conversion when you come to this formula here by looking at the table or the graph that you are given. You see, so now what do we have? We'll say we have our f of x is equals to, we have this one, it's this, we have minus 585. Then since we're working to the right or to the positive side of this table, we will say plus, what is our k? Our k is 29.25. We'll say we have 29.25, then we multiply by the period, multiply by the period, which is 20. So yeah, you can just do it like this, or you can write your x. So this will give you how much? Your negative 585 plus 29.25 multiply by your 20. This will give you a 0. Then you go and check, do you have any 0 on the table? Then you see that you definitely don't have an f of x or a x value where you're having that 0. So if you don't, then you find a number like this, it means already you are somewhere along somewhere along here on the positive side of the table, but those values, remember, they are not included. So what do you do if you are faced with this situation? You come back to your same k value and you round it up. So instead of having 29.25, you're going to be having what? You're going to use it as 30. So what does this 30 mean in relation to this? It just means now your graph is going to be making 30 jumps. You see? So your graph is going to be making 30 jumps. So now you're going to do it again. So this one was the first time. The second time, still going to say your f of x is equals to minus 585 plus your 30 multiplied by your 20. Even if you use a dot, is fine. Then and now, what are you going to get? You're going to get your 15. You see? So if you get your 15, then if you read from the table that your f of 15, what value does it give you? You have your 15 is indeed in the table. Then you try and read, what does your f of 15 give you? Your f of your 15, it gives you your 1.7. So as easy as that. You always start by doing what? Your checks with this k value that you are given. And if it still doesn't give you the value that you have on your table, you round up the very same k value. Then now you will see that it's just going to give you something that is on the table. Then you read the final answer, then you get your mark. And also, just to repeat again, when you are working out your k value, you don't consider the sign that you're going to be having at that side. You only just like take the numbers as they are. The signs is going to be considered here. Let's say, let me just write it like this. This would be positive or negative. Then you've worked out the number of jumps the graph is going to be making. So we said the correct one is going to be 30 jumps. So 30 jumps will give you exactly that 1.7. So yeah, that's it on how you do these periodic functions. So yeah, see you in the next video.